Hello, I'm Joe Kalt. I'm a professor at the Kennedy School. I've been working with PAE students for many, many years, and today what I want to talk about is the use of case studies as a research method for your PAE. And I want to cover sort of four basic things. First, what is a case study? Second, what is the value of case studies in your research? Third, how do you choose and design case studies so that you can maximize their contribution to your work? And lastly, how do you maximize the evidence and the lessons learned out of case studies? So let me talk about each of those things. First, let's talk about what is a useful case study. First, what is it? Well, a case study is a detailed and analytic. By that we mean not just telling stories, but thinking through applying structures, constructs, theories to examine a specific program, initiative, public policy, etc. A case study needs to be focused on the pivotal decisions and decision makers. What did they do positively or negatively that affected the outcomes that your client is interested in? You want to choose case studies that have the ability to give you answers to that kind of question. What can you learn from a case study? What can you learn from a case study? Well, one of the things that you get out of a case study is how theoretical classroom frameworks, an economic model, an organizational behavior model, a political science theory, how do those things really look and feel in the real world? A case study lets you get into the real world and really filter that real world through those structures that you've been taught in the classroom. And that's important because it's going to give you specific confirmation or rejection of theories and predictions that you learned in the classroom. A theory, a higher budget will help performance, or better leadership training will help managers. Does it really? Well, those are the kinds of things that you can test and examine in a case study. Also, a case study will give you some of the subtlety and context that can contribute to the design of the larger data analysis that you may be doing. They can give you subtleties and context that help you interpret the findings that you're getting. And lastly, the subtleties and contexts of the real world that come out of a case study can teach you about the realism and the value of your recommendations. In other words, you don't get lost out somewhere in just the data, but by being in a case study, you can pick up the flavor, the context, how people look at problems, and what will communicate to them in their real-world contexts. And so a case study has that capacity if it's done well. Now, what are the key considerations in choosing and designing a case study? First, you want to pick a case study. Does it contain the important elements that characterize your client's setting and challenges? There might be dimensions of size, budget size, participant size if you're looking at a program, the political constraints. In other words, you want to try to find a case study that kind of fits the context that you're working in. If I'm studying something like the performance of a jobs program in St. Louis, for example, it may not be very smart for me to pick a 50-year-old case of a jobs program in London. You want to try to find a context, a setting that will fit the case that you're fundamentally interested in and that your client is interested in. The other question you want to ask yourself about a case study is when you're trying to figure out what case to look at, should I look at this case or that, is can you really get inside the case enough to understand the history, the players, their values, their objectives, their key decisions? Sometimes that's a function of the people you're working with. If you're going to go on site and do interviews and so forth, you want to know, do you have the cooperation of your client or the case that you're looking at? Will they really open up to you? Perhaps you're doing a case study from written documents. Are those documents deep enough and rich enough to tell you enough about the case that you can actually capture its essence and understand the causal factors that are affecting a good outcome, a bad outcome, or whatever? So you want to try to understand, can you really get inside the case enough to make it useful and for you to understand who the players are, what the issues are, what were the key decisions, what were the key outcomes. Also, you want to know, can you map the facts of the case into an applicable analytic framework? By that I mean, you might be working with an economic model or an organizational behavior model, and there are 3 key factors, said the professor in the classroom. Well, can you look at those 3 key factors and really pick them up in the case method, in the case study? So you want to know that you've got a case that, geez, those structures that I bring to this analysis, bring to this case, actually I can pick up those structures and those factors in this case. And lastly, you want to know whether you can put the case into the context of what is known from others' research. I find when I've used case studies, one of the most valuable things you can do is you tell your case story, you draw out the case study, and then you say, these results are consistent with what such and such researcher found in this context. You want to be able to embed your case study in a broader research literature, broader research findings, partly to give yourself some credibility that you're actually reading this case in a way that makes sense and is consistent with others who've done similar work, but also because in comparing and contrasting your own results with what's in other people's research, maybe their writings and so forth, you're then better able to draw out the implications and the lessons that are buried inside a case. Now, how do you get the most out of case studies? Well, that's really a question of knowledge. In other words, when you look at a case study, how do you know that you have good evidence or that you're drawing a coherent conclusion? It's easy in case studies, and I've had many students do it, and I've done it myself, to sort of wallow around in a pool of facts, and you're just buried in so many, this person said that, another person said this, and it's hard to integrate those things into something where you're actually able to draw out the knowledge, the insights, the lessons that are buried in that case. And in some ways, that's the true art of case studies. It's not to tell a good story, but to be able to draw out of the story what are actually the determinative factors that are determining why an outcome occurred, why this program was successful, why that one was not. In a complicated multiple causal world, can you isolate and credibly weight determinative factors? And let me say something about weighting factors. We live in a world that's really complicated. There are 1,000 things that affect the performance, let's say, of a program or a policy. The budget, the politics, the weather, who knows what it is. But what you have to do as the analyst is to try to come up with a credible weighting of what was really important. Was it really important that the general manager got straight A's in high school? Probably not. It might be much more important that that manager had a good staff or that manager had a good legislative mandate. So that weighting of the determinative factors is absolutely critical in determining or in giving you outcomes that'll be useful to your client. Words aren't worth a lot. I do these case studies. I work a lot with American Indian nations on economic development. And I go in and I talk to a tribal politician, and they tell me, oh, what's really messing up our economy is X. And then I go talk to a program manager, no, it's Y. And then I go talk to somebody else, and it's something else. You can be buried in words, which is what takes me back to you need to try to apply some of the principles of large sample data analysis. You've taken your classes in statistics and econometrics and so forth. You know that first, theory guides the modeling, and it should guide the case study. Theory guides the modeling and the case study. What does that mean? Well, it means that in structuring your questions, in the things that you look at, the papers you ask for, the people that you interview, you're going to want to be guided, again, by what I started with. What did you learn in the classroom about the 5 key factors that determine X or whatever your theory might be? And structure your analysis based on where that framework of analysis guides you. Otherwise, you just end up doing endless interviews and you end up being buried in words that really don't tell you who's right when party A says this factor mattered and party B said no, it didn't. You need to have an analytic structure. The other thing you can do that you get out of large sample data analysis is this thing holding other things constant. And this is important because how do you do that? Well, I've had, in my own work, tremendous success, I hope, in using comparative case studies. Take two programs, one that's performing very well, one that is performing very poorly. Try to hold constant as many things as you can. The year they were started, their budgets, perhaps. Whatever you think you can hold constant to get at the real factors that determine why was program A a success and program B a failure. What you want to do then is that'll allow you to isolate. If one factor is present in both cases, then you can't say as an analyst that factor is really critical to the success because it was present in both the success case and the failure case. What you're trying to do is hold constant as much as you can to see what the differences are. That then allows you to make meaningful statements that says, I found factor A was present in this first case where we had success, and factor A was not present in the second case. That leads to the tentative conclusion that factor A is causing or contributing to the success of the program or the policy or whatever it is that you're looking at. In that regard, I urge you can actually, now these days, code your case studies. You can measure your factors, or with simple presence or absence of given factors, you can actually code them. And there's a great set of analyses. And I'd urge you all to take a look at a little short book by a fellow named Charles Reagan called The Comparative Method. And he talks about how to take these case studies and isolate what you can honestly say out of the case by holding other things constant when you have case A and case B, or case A, B, and C, or many cases. So the challenge is to try to isolate those causal factors that allow you to say, this factor is really important to the success of the program. But these other factors might be, but I can't isolate them. So often when analysts, students, professors undertake case studies, we again get lost in this pool of facts. And it's so easy I want factor A to be an important factor. I want factor B. But wait a minute. Factor A is present in both success and failure. Well, I can't say that A is a key cause of success from my case studies. So this comparative method allows you to isolate factors that are present in one case, not present in another. And I urge you to undertake comparative case studies. I often call them pairwise case studies. Take two cases, a success and a failure, and try to compare and contrast them. What's different about the case where I'm seeing, say, success or good outcomes or budgetary success that's not present in the other case? So the case method is tremendously valuable, but you've got to be able to go in and put these analytic structures and think like an analyst, not just tell stories. Good luck with your PAEs.